Hello and welcome to another special bonus episode of Damn Interesting Week. This bonus episode is all about the devious, nefarious, and sometimes frankly weird world of spycraft. Why? Well, that's classified. What I can tell you is that the gooseberries are doing well this year and the green canary flies at dawn. So get out your decoders and double-check that cyanide tooth as we embark on our mission to infiltrate the archives and escape with some truly priceless information. My name is Jennifer Lee Noonan.
I'm Angela Epley.
I'm Spurr-Chen.
I'm Bradley Calhoun.
And these were some damn interesting weeks.
First Link.
This article comes to us from atlasobscura.com, and it's titled, When the CIA Spied on American Citizens Using Pigeons.
Oh, really?
See, okay, now
Yeah.
hold on, because this is one of those things that's supposed to be like a conspiracy theory. Are you telling me it's real? Because,
Yeah.
Oh, no.
all right.
The subtitle is, The Seemingly Bird-Brained Cold War Experiment is Still Partially Classified.
What? Wait,
Yeah.
is it still in effect?
No, just classified, as in they won't tell us exactly everything that they were doing then because of various, nefarious pigeon-related schemes, I assume. But so it may sound unusual, but the idea of using pigeons for espionage wasn't without merit. The United States military had itself been using pigeons since the late 1800s for communication, but Elizabeth McAllister, author of War Pigeons, Winged Couriers in the U.S. Military, 1878 to 1957, says, I could not document any instance of them being used for reconnaissance. Enter the CIA. For several years, the Office of Research and Development, ORD, has carried out endeavors to train different species of birds, states a declassified September 1976 CIA working paper. By September 76, the ORD had already invested $100,000 not just training pigeons, but designing harnesses and cameras for the operation. Various methods of releasing the pigeons were trialed, including a modified VW Beetle to transport the birds. Taking inspiration from stage magicians, the CIA cut a hole in the floor of the Beetle, allowing for pigeons to be surreptitiously released.
Under the car.
Under a car?
That sounds
Yeah.
dangerous. Like half of them are going to get run over.
Seriously, the success rate of release had to be super low. How dare they?
By October 1976, the birds were flying over Andrews Air Force Base near Washington, D.C., and in February 77, the CIA proposed a further feasibility test at the Navy Yard in southeast D.C. The Navy Yard was a bustling center of activity. Ceremonial docks mingled with active docks for ships under repair. Air conditioners could easily be seen on top of buildings, and it was possible to count the window panes on the old naval gun factory. It's possible to make out the shape of the headlights on their vehicles, and their clothing with the styles of the 70s are easily visible as well. While it can be debated that a certain level of privacy is forfeit while on a military installation, this is explicitly not the case outside their gates. A tantalizingly small number of photos by the pigeons have been declassified, some of which show homes outside the Navy Yard. In 1975, the CIA had been castigated on the front page of the New York Times for experimenting on Americans. The details released by congressional investigations, as reported by the National Security Archive, concluded the CIA had violated its charter for 25 years through illegal wiretapping, domestic surveillance, and human experimentation.
Aw.
And they really learned their lesson, I think we can say.
Yeah, and it had not even been 2 years, and the CIA had turned Americans into unwitting test subjects again. The declassified files end in 1978. A lengthy April 1st, 1978 report stated that the program met the high-resolution requirement and was feasible provided more testing was conducted. Others in the CIA did not agree. A memo labeled the program a mess that hadn't proven anything, and it advised against adoption. But the extent of the program remains unknown. The most recent public comments by the CIA come from a 2021 video advising parts of the mission are actually still classified.
I mean, I guess they must have used pigeons because they were so predominant, because it feels like crows or something else would be smarter.
Well, pigeons have been used for messenger purposes throughout all of the world wars, right?
Yeah, and I guess if like half of them get run over, there's always more. Like you don't want to invest in a crow, but like
Well, I feel like maybe the crow is too smart and it just may feel like, you know what? I'm not doing this anymore.
Yeah, exactly.
Next link.
Next link.
All right. Well, next up, we have a pretty wild one from narratively.com, which, as you might expect, is a first-person account that is super engaging and dramatic. And I really recommend you check this one out because I'm not going to have time to give you even half of the salacious details in this. It's called My High-Flying Life as a Corporate Spy Who Lied His Way to the Top.
I have to admit that I started to read this one. I couldn't finish it because my rage was at such a boil.
Yeah. It gets so good, though. So our protagonist-ish here is Robert Kerbeck, who was, and I guess still is, an aspiring actor who actually has had a decent number of parts over the years, but never really enough to make a living. He mentions roles in what he calls B-grade shows, like Renegade and Pacific Blue. Plus, he had walk-on roles in Chicago Hope, Melrose Place, ER, and he even got to murder George Clooney once in an episode of Sisters.
Hey!
All of this to say he's actually a pretty good liar, which is what made him so good as a corporate spy. So he started the gig in the late 80s in New York when a fellow aspiring actor friend named Pax offered to hook him up with a pretty sweet, flexible, part-time job in, quote, sales, making $8 an hour, which at the time was a good amount of money. So he goes to the interview, and the boss lady is in leopard print and really expensive jewelry, and there's a real polar bear fur rug on the floor, and she doesn't even ask to see his resume. She just talks to him for a few minutes and tells him he's hired. And he pretty quickly finds out that what they're doing is calling corporations and getting random assistants or whoever they can get on the phone to give them the names, job titles, and, if possible, phone numbers of their various employees. Because other companies will use this information to reach out and poach people to come work at their company instead. And I'd never really thought about a company's basic org chart being that desirable, but in pre-internet days, it was worth big bucks.
Oh, yeah.
So he goes into a lot of the different ways that they'd get people to trust them on the phone. Like one of his coworkers would put on an Irish accent and pretend to be a student writing a paper. So she would ask the receptionist for the names of everyone in a particular department so she could reach out to interview them. And she'd throw in lots of emotional details about how if she didn't do well on her paper, her student visa could be in jeopardy. And they'd also use tricks like just asking for the names and then saying, oops, can you go down the list again and give me everyone's job title? And then, oh, real quick, could you give me their extensions too? So, of course, as you would expect, Robert's pretty bad at it at first, but he gets better. And eventually his girlfriend, Giada, takes over a lot of the paperwork and organization so he can focus more on his strength, which is the lying. So one of their most profitable lies was during Y2K. He would pretend to be in the IT department of the company he was calling and act like he needed to enter every employee into the new system by hand in order to protect everyone's data. So people bought into that because everyone was very scared about Y2K and they didn't know what was needed to fix it. Or sometimes he would say he was actually a client who was very satisfied with the company's performance and wanted to give everyone free tickets to a basketball game or whatever, and he needed to know who to send them to. So by 2008, he was bringing in $2 million a year. Until one day, he gets a panicked phone call from his friend Pax, who says the police are after him, everything's falling apart, and he's just going to turn himself in. And Robert's like, no, don't do that. Technically, what we're doing isn't illegal, and they have nothing on you, and just sit tight and this will all go away. That, of course, was another lie. Because it turns out every single phone call they made qualified as federal wire fraud. And if the fraud affected a financial institution specifically, the punishment could be up to $1 million and 30 years in prison for every call. And they had made thousands of them. But he tells Pax it's fine because he doesn't want Pax to give him up. And ultimately, it did turn out to be fine because the police were actually thinking that Pax might be Kevin Mitnick, who was a guy who was basically doing the same thing they were, but through digital hacking. And ultimately, they did catch Mitnick, also known as the dark side hacker, and he went to jail under domestic terrorism charges.
Wow.
Domestic terrorism.
Yeah,
Wow.
exactly. So that was a little scary for the boys, and they specifically started avoiding financial institutions after that, as well as telecom companies. Because he said for whatever reason, places like Sprint took their security much more seriously than most companies, and they came close to catching them a couple of times.
And yet they're the ones that went under.
Right.
It doesn't exist anymore.
Well, that's why, because this guy got all their information. All their best employees got poached, man. Eventually, the party did wind down. First, because of the internet in general, and more specifically because of LinkedIn, where suddenly people are just putting all that same information out there for free.
Transparency, man.
And there's a fair amount of reflection in the article about, how he feels about his career, looking back on it now. One of the interesting things he says is that the information stealing never bothered him and still doesn't. But he did develop genuine relationships with a lot of his best contacts over the years, because a lot of times he would establish himself as this character, and then he'd just call back a couple months later and be like, hey, it's time again. Corporate wants to know this. And the person would be like, oh, okay, how are the kids? And whatever. And he would be real friends with them. And he feels bad about creating this entire fake persona with people who he genuinely liked and wouldn't want to lie to. So that was the aspect about the lying that bothered him.
It hurt me. I don't like how they affected me.
Right,
Yeah,
exactly.
somehow that defense just felt like, I don't know, good lying.
Right. Anyway, like I've said, I've skimmed a lot here. The article itself is based on a full memoir from this same guy. So I imagine there's even more to the story. Probably some of it is lies. You know, who knows? He could be making it all up. Like, what a great scam that would be, though, if you were an actor who had really just been an actor and now you'd written a memoir that you were claiming was factual, but in fact, you had just made all of it up.
Yeah, you know that Catch Me While You Can movie?
Catch Me If You Can, yeah.
Yeah. It turns out that guy was also full of crap.
Really?
Yeah,
Oh. Well,
he was in jail for most of that stuff that he said he was doing, all of that stuff.
well, he did do something if he ended up in jail.
He did. But all the rest of that stuff, not so
Right.
much. It's hard to verify. And just the idea of fake it until you make it is like the mantra of business. I remember hearing a story from my father about a friend of his who had a startup company. He was on the second floor. So he had to pass through the first floor, which was an already established company every day, which he, developed a relationship with the people that he was passing through. When it came time to get a bank loan, he brought the bank through that lobby, pretending as if they were all his employees.
Oh, wow.
He got the bank loan.
Yeah.
But this was also 1980s, and he was a white dude, so he probably would have gotten the bank loan anyway.
Right.
So,
Well,
yeah.
it was fascinating to me. I just learned recently credit scores didn't even exist until the late 70s. Prior to that, it really was just walk in, and if the bank teller's got a good feeling about you, you get your loan. Like, there really was no real way to verify anything.
Mm-hmm. Get the nice face discount.
That's right, yes.
Seinfeld reference, sorry.
Next link?
Next link.
Well, speaking of weapons, this article comes to us from TheGuardian.com. It's titled Cuban Missile Crisis 60 Years On. New papers reveal how close the world came to nuclear disaster.
Oh, yikes.
Oh, very close, I imagine.
Extremely. So the commander of a nuclear-armed Soviet submarine panicked and came close to launching a nuclear torpedo during the Cuban Missile Crisis 60 years ago after being blinded and disoriented by aggressive U.S. tactics, according to newly translated documents. Many nuclear historians agree that October 27th, 1962, known as Black Saturday, was the closest the world came to nuclear catastrophe, as U.S. forces enforced a blockade of Cuba to stop deliveries of Soviet missiles. The most perilous moment came when one of those submarines, B-59, was forced to surface late at night in the Sargasso Sea to recharge its batteries and found itself surrounded by U.S. destroyers and anti-submarine planes circling overhead. In a newly translated account, one of the senior officers on board, Captain Second Class Vasily Arkhipov, said one of the U.S. planes turned on powerful searchlights and blinded the people on the bridge so that their eyes hurt. The commander panicked, calling for an urgent dive and for the number 1 torpedo with a nuclear warhead to be prepared. However, because the signaling officer was in the way, Savitsky could not immediately get down the narrow stairway through the conning tower, and during those few moments of hesitation, Arkhipov realized that the U.S. forces were signaling rather than attacking and deliberately firing off to the side of the submarine. He called to Savitsky and said, "Calm down. Look, they are signaling, not attacking. Let's signal back." Tom Blanton, the director of the National Security Archive, said the aggressive tactics used by the American submarine hunters contributed to the close shave. At a conference in Havana in 2002, John Peterson, a lieutenant on the USS Beale, the destroyer closest to the Russian submarine, said he and his crew resented their orders to use only practice depth charges, which just made a loud bang. So they stuffed hand grenades into toilet roll tubes, which would hold the pin down for a couple of 100 meters before disintegrating, causing the grenade to explode next to the submarine's hull.
Yikes. That is such a weird yet creative application of like the cartoon Dynamite, where you light the fuse and it takes time, except this time it's toilet paper that dissolves in water and then boom. Oh my goodness.
Yeah. The B-59 incident was just one of a cascade of crises that day. A U-2 went missing over Siberia, and the pilot lost his bearings, blinded by the aurora borealis and misled by compass malfunction close to the North Pole. Some F-102 interceptor jets were scrambled to protect the U-2, but the Joint Chiefs of Staff who gave the order for their launch were not aware they had been armed with nuclear missiles as a matter of course once the alert level was raised to DEFCON 2. Minutes later, the Joint Chiefs heard that another U-2 had been shot down over Cuba and assumed it was a deliberate escalation by Moscow. The Joint Chiefs were also unaware that there were 80 nuclear warheads on the missiles already in Cuba when they gave their recommendation for the US to carry out airstrikes and then an invasion of Cuba. The recommendation was overruled by President John Kennedy as negotiations with Soviet representatives, some of them in a Washington Chinese restaurant, were making progress, leading ultimately to the withdrawal of Soviet missiles from Cuba, while US missiles were pulled back from Turkey. Kalina said the danger of disaster would remain as long as nuclear weapons were part of the military equation.
Mm-hmm. But, how are you going to get rid of all the nukes? Like, no one's ever going to really agree to that. It's going to be this eternal standoff of like, well, you go first. And then, well, what if they say they got rid of them, but they kept a few on the side? We better do the same. Like, I don't know. People are fallible, but they're also jerks. Like,
I think we have to turn the worst of human behavior towards the situation to resolve it. Like, we need to get space travel a little bit better so that we're able to have interstellar nuclear war battles that are purely for entertainment. Right, I'm thinking like American Gladiator, except it's Galactic Gladiator, and you've got these mines that are actually nuclear. But I'm just saying, we can go out of the box with this one.
Well, yeah. I mean, and also if you have a chance to routinely see the level of destruction, it sort of is a reminder of like, oh, hey, we really don't want to do this on Earth. Mm-hmm. Get it done out in space where everyone can
where we can't see it and it doesn't bother us as much.
Right, but we can learn from it. Like, sacrifice Mercury. No one needs that one.
Fighting words.
Next link.
Next link. Okay, this is an article from BBC News, an update about convicted U.S. spy Robert Hansen. He was found dead in his Colorado prison. So whether you choose to mourn him or celebrate a double-crossing double agent spy that was alive in our lifetime, it was kind of a notorious story. So he was an FBI agent who turned into a Russian mole, and he is known as one of the most damaging spies in U.S. history. He was discovered at his maximum security facility in Florence, Colorado at 79. Over his lifetime, he received more than $1.4 million in cash, diamonds, and money paid into Russian accounts. At one point, 300 agents were working on his case. It was huge, and if you didn't hear about it, they probably wanted to sweep it under the rug. But he was sentenced in 2002 to life in prison for espionage. Cause of death has yet to be confirmed, but the way that he got away with this was just kind of insane. So he lived in a 4-bedroom house in suburban Virginia with his wife and 6 children prior to the arrest. And because of the role he had in the FBI as counterintelligence, he had access to classified information. And in 1985, that's when he started his criminal activity, sending material to Russia and the former Soviet Union. So according to the FBI's website, he, quote, compromised numerous human sources, dozens of classified U.S. government documents, and technical operations of extraordinary importance and value. But while there was some suspicion around his unusual activities occasionally, dude got away with this for years. He had been due to retire at the point when they started looking into him, so they had to act super quickly, and they wanted to catch him, quote unquote, red-handed. They wanted to lure him back to FBI headquarters so they could obviously monitor him a bit closer. So they gave him a fake assignment. He began working in his new office at FBI headquarters in 2001 without realizing it was bugged to high heaven with hidden cameras and microphones all over the place. Investigators learned he was scheduled to make a dead drop at a park. So on 18 February 2001, Hansen went to Foxstone Park, located in Virginia, with a plastic bag filled with classified materials. The FBI had seen him frequently in the park before, and as he returned to his vehicle, he was arrested and taken into custody. And during his arrest, he asked FBI agents, quote, "What took you so long?" So he told interrogators that FBI security was pathetic, but he cooperated to avoid the death penalty. Friends and neighbors said they were shocked by his arrest, described him as quiet and unassuming, which, is the dead giveaway now, right?
Right. You have to be loud and brash or you're suspicious these days.
Right? His family drove to Mass every Sunday in a 10-year-old van. He was said to be a strict father who limited television for his children. During the time of his arrest, CBS News reported he would frequent strip clubs where he would try to convert strippers to Catholicism.
All right.
He did plead guilty to 15 counts of espionage and in May 2002 was sentenced to life without parole.
I guess my question is, how many strippers did he convert to Catholicism? Because, you got to have some accomplishments in your life.
Right? I would kind of like to see a Catholic saint of converted strippers.
I bet there is one. Because what they do is they have the pantheon of saints, and then they just sort of keep adding things to each one. So a particular saint will be like the saint of gardening and jesters and house sales. And
yes. Yes. It's a very scalable model if you think about it.
Yes, it is, honestly. It's very efficient.
Next link?
Next link.
This article comes to us from TheGuardian.com, and it's titled, Russia Deploys Trained Dolphins at Black Sea Naval Base, Satellite Images Show. So, the U.S. Naval Institute, or USNI, reviewed satellite imagery of the naval base at Sevastopol Harbor and concluded that 2 dolphin pens were moved to the base in February at the start of Moscow's invasion of Ukraine. Russia has a history of training dolphins for military purposes, using the aquatic mammals to retrieve objects or deter enemy divers. The Sevastopol naval base is crucial for Russian military as it sits in the southern tip of Crimea, which Moscow seized in 2014. According to the USNI's analysis, many of the Russian ships anchored there, while out of range from missiles, are potentially vulnerable to undersea attacks. Ukraine had also trained dolphins at an aquarium near Sevastopol in a program born out of a Soviet-era scheme that fell into neglect in the 1990s. But during the Cold War, both the US and Soviet Union developed the use of dolphins, whose echolocation capabilities can allow them to detect underwater objects such as mines. And the US has spent at least $28 million maintaining its own troops of dolphins and sea lions, which are also trainable, to potentially help with conflicts.
But
yeah.
Sorry, I'm getting hyper empathic. Like, if we can train them to do such things, need it be in that direction? Oh,
I mean, at least they're giving them the intelligence and the tools that they need to maybe survive. Like riding a horse into war, that horse doesn't know what it's doing. It doesn't, I mean, it's lucky if it gets armor, but it's definitely not going to have any weapons to fight back. It sounds like these dolphins are at least, they're like super agents. They can get something done.
Yeah, and, if you can balance a beach ball on your nose, you're ready to enlist.
Oh, for sure. Yeah.
So, the Sevastopol program was resurrected in 2012 by the Ukrainian Navy, but the mammals fell into Russian hands after the 2014 invasion of Crimea. Ukraine unsuccessfully demanded the return of the animals, and RA Novosti reported that Moscow planned to expand the scheme. 2 years later, the Russian Navy announced plans to buy 5 more dolphins, launching a bidding process for a 1.7 million ruble, or about $21,000, contract to deliver dolphins to the Sevastopol base by the end of the summer.
Where did they source these dolphins? Who's selling dolphins to the Russian military? Because
I know.
I'm waiting for that article.
Yeah, do dolphins have their own private military corps? Because, I'm like...
This dark marketplace of dolphin dealing needs to have some sunlight.
Yeah, I mean, most likely they're just kidnapping them and then force training them. That's what I assume,
golly.
Right? Yeah, so satellite imagery from 2018 revealed Russia also used dolphins at its naval base in Tartus, Syria during the Syrian war. And dolphins are not the only ocean creatures that Russian military may have trained. A beluga whale spotted off the coast of Norway in 2019 was believed to be trained by the Russian Navy. Fishermen reported a beluga whale wearing strange harnesses, which may have held cameras, harassing their boats, pulling on straps and ropes from the side of boats.
Are they not endangered?
Well, if they weren't before, they're going to be now that word's gotten out that they attack ships. People are just going to be indiscriminately killing anything they see coming close.
Yeah, there's a whole lot happening in the world that I am reminded of every time I do this podcast.
I mean, every child dreams of being a marine biologist. They just don't necessarily think they're going to be working for the military when they do it.
Yeah. I mean, sometimes that just stops at marine, and there you go.
Right.
Next link.
Next link.
All right, well, we've got a little bit of a strange one here. It's a YouTube video from Cheddar News, and it's called What the Secret Service Really Does.
Oh.
And of course, as a video, it starts off with all these various movie clips of what we think the Secret Service is, right? You know, diving on top of the president, taking a bullet, wearing sunglasses all the time. But it turns out that's only a small part of their job. And in the beginning, it wasn't part of their job at all. So the Secret Service was created by Abraham Lincoln on April 14th, 1865, which was ironically just hours before he was assassinated by John Wilkes Booth. But like I said, it wouldn't have done him any good to have signed the bill a week earlier because initially they were a subset of the Treasury Department and their job was to investigate counterfeiters. So counterfeiting was a huge problem during and after the Civil War to the point that somewhere between 1/3 and 1/2 of all circulating U.S. currency was fake. So they did their job and they'd been chugging along doing counterfeit investigations for 36 years when, in 1901, President William McKinley was assassinated. And the government realized they didn't have any kind of police at the federal level who could investigate this crime. So they assigned the task to the Secret Service, not as bodyguards for future presidents, but just to figure out after the fact who had committed this particular crime. Then, in 1906, President Roosevelt brought in Charles Bonaparte as his attorney general. And the name was not a coincidence. This guy was actually Napoleon's grandnephew. And Bonaparte helped secure funding for the Secret Service to officially begin protecting the president and his family as part of their duties. But he also really accelerated this idea that the Secret Service was available to him whenever he needed investigators for a crime that he felt like the individual states were not going to handle appropriately. And he was calling them up all the time until in 1908, Congress said, hey, stop it. That isn't cool. You can't keep borrowing these guys. And they passed a law that said no one else could borrow the Secret Service. So Bonaparte said, well, if I can't have them, then I'm going to create a new department of investigators that do belong to me. And he took 9 of his favorite Secret Service agents, plus 25 new hires, and created the Federal Bureau of Investigation. But even though they completely took over the post-crime investigative stuff, and no one else was supposed to be borrowing the Secret Service still remained this kind of catch-all department that kept getting assigned duties whenever the government didn't know who else to give them to.
Oh, dear.
So by the early 2000s, they were doing tons of different stuff, and the Department of Homeland Security was formed. So at that point, they decided it made more sense to officially move the Secret Service out of the Treasury Department, even though they were still in charge of chasing down counterfeiters, and that remains a key part of their job even today. So officially, these days, the Secret Service has 4 mandates. First, economic safeguarding, or to protect the integrity of U.S. currency. Second, cyber investigations, which includes network breaches, ransomware attacks, wire fraud, and credit card fraud, both online and through in-person physical devices like ATM skimmers. So, I mean, if you commit fraud or try to counterfeit a dollar bill, you still will get visited by the Secret Service, not the FBI. Third, public safety, which is very vague, but generally allows them to assist the FBI in terrorism investigations. And fourth, national security, which of course includes offering protection to our own president, but also to visiting world leaders and other high-ranking diplomats and officials. And that's kind of it. There's also some neat footage of what past Secret Service agents looked like. For example, it was apparently very common for them to stand completely unsecured on the running board of moving vehicles, presumably until Kennedy was shot and presidents stopped riding in open cars. And you can also kind of see the evolution of their fashion over the years as they go from these tan suits and like straw boater hats in the 30s all the way up to the dark suits and sunglasses. And, you know, overall, it definitely makes it clear that the Secret Service's job is way more boring most of the time than the movies portray. Like, if you sign up, you're going to be investigating counterfeiters. You're not going to be taking a bullet for the president.
But that ambiguity might be fun when it's like, hey, FBI needs some extras. Let's go help them out.
You know, those guys working in the counterfeiting department are like wearing sunglasses anyway. They're like, I'm still cool. Next link.
Next link. This article comes to us from Wired.com, and it's titled How a Saxophonist Tricked the KGB by Encrypting Secrets in Music. In 1985, saxophonist Meryl Goldberg found herself on a plane to Moscow with 3 fellow musicians from the Boston Klezmer Conservatory Band. She had carefully packed sheet music, reeds, and other woodwind supplies, along with a soprano sax, to bring into the USSR. But one of her spiral-bound notebooks, lined with staves for hand-notating music, contained hidden information. Using a code she had developed herself, Goldberg had obscured names, addresses, and other details the group would need for their trip in handwritten compositions that looked, to the untrained eye, like the real melodies she'd written on other pages of the book. Goldberg and her colleagues didn't want to give Soviet officials details of who they planned to see and what they planned to do on their trip. They were going to meet the Phantom Orchestra. The group was a dissident ensemble that Goldberg describes as an amalgamation of Jewish refuseniks, or Jews who were barred from emigrating out of the USSR, Christian activists, and Helsinki monitors, watchdogs who tracked Soviet compliance with the 1975 Helsinki Accords. The trip was a rare and special opportunity for American and Soviet players to meet in the USSR and make music together. It was also an opportunity for the American musicians to smuggle information about aid efforts and plans to the Phantom Orchestra, and for the ensemble to send updates out, including details about individuals looking to escape the Soviet Union. Goldberg and her colleagues, all of whom are Jewish, traveled to Moscow separately in 2 pairs to make it less likely that they would arouse suspicion as a group. They had received training on how to react to questioning and been told to expect surveillance, even run-ins with Soviet officials, throughout their trip. But first, Goldberg needed to get her notebook past border control. Goldberg says, "When we arrived, we were immediately pulled aside, and they went through everything in our luggage to the point of unwrapping Tampax. It was crazy. With my music, they opened it up, and there were some real tunes in there. If you're not a musician, you wouldn't know what's what. They went page by page through everything, and then they handed it back." Goldberg said that while the code worked and Soviet officials didn't confiscate their music, they did interrogate all 4 travelers about what they planned to do while in the USSR. Goldberg remembers, "We were brought into a room with a big burly guy who banged on the table and yelled at us." And Goldberg is now a music education professor at California State University, San Marcos. Musical note names span the letters A to G, so they don't provide a full alphabet of options on their own. To create the code, Goldberg assigned letters of the alphabet to notes in the chromatic scale, a 12-tone scale that includes semitones, sharps and flats, to expand the possibilities. In some examples, Goldberg only wrote in one musical range, known as treble clef. In others, she expanded the register to be able to encode more letters and added a bass clef to extend the range of the musical scale. For numbers, Goldberg would simply write them between the staves, where sometimes you might see chord symbols. She also added other characteristics of composition like rhythms, key signatures, tempo markings, and articulation indicators like slurs and ties. Most of these were there to make the music look more legitimate, but some doubled as coded supplements to the letters hidden in the music notes. She even occasionally drew tiny diagrams that could be mistaken for charts to remind herself of where a meeting place was located or how to deliver something. While somebody could have technically played the code as music, it would have sounded less like a tune and more like a cat walking across piano keys.
Yeah.
Goldberg says, "I picked a note to start, and then I created the alphabet from there. Once you know it, it ends up being pretty easy to write things. I taught my friends on the trip the code too, and we coded things while we were there so we would be able to take out some information about people and their efforts to emigrate, as well as details we hoped could help other people asked to leave." The US musicians got their bearings in Moscow before heading to Tbilisi, the capital of Georgia. During 8 days of travel, the musicians were tailed constantly by Soviet guards and agents and were repeatedly stopped for questioning. Goldberg says that members of the Phantom Orchestra, all of whom faced similar treatment in their daily lives, gave her and her colleagues advice and encouragement. When the Americans would express concerns that their presence was endangering the activists, Goldberg says the Phantom Orchestra members were resolute about the importance of spending time together. She adds, though, that some of the activists were later arrested and even beaten because of their interactions. Goldberg says, "On the second night, we were playing together and the KGB came in and everything got shut down. The electricity was turned off and it was a scary situation. And yet, when we're playing music, no one can take away that sense of freedom and empowerment. Playing together and communicating with people through music is like nothing else." After their time in Yerevan, the American musicians had planned to go to Riga, the capital of Latvia, and then to Leningrad, now St. Petersburg, in Russia. Finally, they were set to stop in Paris before returning to the United States. Instead, they were stopped and questioned again. The musicians were supposed to be placed under house arrest in Yerevan, but Goldberg says that Armenian officials bristled at the KGB intrusion and let them continue their trip. Eventually, though, the musicians were picked up and escorted back to Moscow, where Soviet agents confiscated their passports. Goldberg says the group was driven around Moscow for several hours, perhaps as a scare tactic, before finally being allowed to stay together in a dormitory room guarded by young Soviet men with machine guns. She says, "At that point, you're thinking they're going to take us to Siberia or something. We were super freaked out, so we kept playing music for each other that night. and we played a beloved Russian folk tune, but out of tune to annoy the young soldier outside of the door. It gave us a sense of humor and empowerment. Finally, officials said the group would be deported to Sweden. While officials searched their possessions again before letting them on the plane, no one ever flagged the sheet music. Goldberg says that while she later learned that some of the Soviet activists faced consequences for the visit, some of the people the musicians met on the trip were eventually able to permanently leave the USSR. She notes that while her musical code wouldn't have been very difficult to crack if someone were focused on it, the obfuscation served its purpose, making it both an elegant and harmonious encryption scheme.
I think if there's one thing stories like this remind me of, it's that I am a coward. I would 100% not do anything like this. I am so in awe of people who do stuff like this, who go into a dangerous situation with contraband that could get them caught and murdered. And I just, amazing.
Yeah. Anytime people use their superpower for good, my faith and hope is restored.
Yeah. But also there's a part of me that's like, why? Why would you do that? That's so stupid. Like, you're going to get killed. And you're going to get your compatriots killed. And I mean, I guess that's the risk that the compatriots have already taken upon themselves. But
when you're in a situation, though, where your options are worse and bad.
Right, exactly. It's like you're going to get killed
we never
anyway.
Have to test that.
Yeah. But that is really cool that she managed to find a way to hide that information. I feel like anyone with even a small amount of musical training would be able to see those notes are all over the place. They're not melodic in the slightest.
Unless you're like like you're John Cage, you know, if you're going to do some like dissonant, it's not meant to sound good. It's like neo jazz.
Yeah,
that's right.
Like, this is for my 1980s jazz noise band. You know?
There you go. Yeah. It's very avant-garde. All right, well, that's going to wrap it up for this bonus episode. We hope you've enjoyed it. As always, if you like our podcast and want to support us and get episodes early, you can do so at patreon.com/damninterestingweek. In the meantime, my name is Jennifer Lee Noonan.
I'm Angela Epley.
I'm Spurr-Chen.
I'm Bradley Calhoun.
And we hope you have a damn interesting week. Bye-bye.